Daniel's stomach had been complaining for the past hour, and now as he weaved through the bustling market, the rich, smoky scent of food wrapped around him like a warm embrace. He didn't need to think twice. His feet were already leading him to the familiar sight of Mama Tinu's food stand, a small but lively spot known for its mouth-watering jollof rice and perfectly crispy fried chicken. The line was long, as always, filled with tired workers, students, and traders, all waiting for their turn to enjoy a meal that never disappointed. Daniel barely noticed the flies hovering lazily around the uncovered pots, occasionally landing on the steaming rice before being waved away by a half-hearted flick of a rag. What did it matter? A little exposure never hurt anyone. When his plate was handed to him, golden rice piled high with a juicy, glistening piece of chicken, his stomach clenched in anticipation. He picked up his spoon, scooped a generous bite, and shoved it into his mouth. The taste was as good as he remembered. Smoky, spicy, rich. But then, a strange crunch. Not the satisfying crisp of fried chicken skin, not the slight resistance of well-cooked rice. This was different. His chewing slowed. Something was wrong. His tongue prodded the foreign object in his mouth. Slowly, he reached in, pinched it between his fingers, and pulled it out. The moment his eyes landed on it, his stomach lurched. Daniel stared at the thing pinched between his fingers, his mind struggling to process what he was looking at. A thin, crispy fragment, dark brown with tiny spines sticking out from its edges. His breath hitched as his brain finally put the pieces together. A fried cockroach leg. His stomach gave an uncomfortable flip. He dropped it onto his plate and swallowed hard, the taste of spices suddenly tainted by the knowledge of what had just been inside his mouth. He clenched his jaw, inhaled deeply through his nose. Maybe, just maybe, this was a one-time accident. A fluke. A mistake. Maybe the insect had fallen into the oil without anyone noticing. Gross? Yes. But things happened. Accidents happened. And wasn't heat supposed to kill germs anyway? He shook his head, trying to push the thought aside. He was too hungry to overthink this. It wasn't like he could afford to be picky. Mama Tinu's stand was one of the few places where you could get a full plate of food without breaking the bank. He grabbed his spoon again, determined to let it go. But just as he was about to take another bite, a fly landed right on the rice. He watched as it rubbed its tiny legs together, shifting slightly, its wings twitching. Then another one landed beside it, and another. Their thin, spindly legs sank slightly into the rice grains, and Daniel swore he saw one of them dragging something along with it. A speck of filth, maybe even waste from wherever it had been before landing on his food. His appetite faltered, his grip on the spoon loosened. Then he noticed something else, a small movement, almost unnoticeable. He leaned in. At first, it looked like nothing, just the usual sheen of oil glistening in the warm glow of the food stand's overhead lamp. But as he stared, he saw it again, a wriggling motion inside the rice. His breath caught. He squinted. Number it couldn't be, but it was. Tiny maggots, barely visible but undeniably there, squirming between the grains. Daniel felt his stomach lurch. He dropped the spoon with a soft clatter, his heart pounding. He looked around, expecting to see someone else reacting the same way, expecting to hear someone scream, push their plate away, call out Mama Tinu. But nothing. People were still eating, still chatting, still shoveling spoonfuls of rice and chicken into their mouths as if they couldn't see what he was seeing. His throat tightened. His hands felt clammy. He had eaten some of that. He had already swallowed it. Daniel pushed back from the table so fast that his stool scraped loudly against the floor. His stomach twisted violently, nausea rising like a wave. He needed to get out of there. Now Daniel stood at a distance, arms folded, his stomach still churning from what he had just experienced. He couldn't shake off the unsettling feeling crawling under his skin. The image of those tiny maggots wriggling between the grains of rice replayed in his mind like a bad dream. His logical side told him to let it go, to walk away and never eat here again. But another part of him, the part that needed to understand, refused to leave. He shifted behind a wooden stool, pretending to scroll on his phone while his eyes stayed glued to Mama Tinu's stand. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Customers came and went, their faces relaxed, oblivious. The workers moved in a rhythm, scooping rice onto plates, flipping chicken in the sizzling oil. Business as usual. Then he saw something that made his stomach turn all over again. One of the workers, a young man in a stained apron, lifted a large wooden spoon and swatted at a cloud of flies hovering over the uncovered pot of jollof. Some scattered, but others stubbornly landed back almost immediately. Without missing a beat, the worker wiped his hand on his apron, then plunged the same spoon into the rice and stirred it like nothing had happened. Daniel's jaw tightened. He kept watching. A few minutes later, another worker carried a large black bucket from the back of the stall and dumped its contents into the main pot of jollof rice. Daniel's stomach twisted. He recognized that grainy, slightly hardened texture. That wasn't freshly cooked rice. That was leftover rice from yesterday. Instead of throwing it away, they were just reheating it, mixing it with today's batch to stretch the portions. His grip on his phone tightened. He told himself he had seen enough, that this was already bad enough. Then the sack moved. Daniel's breath hitched. He hadn't paid much attention to it before, just a large, grimy sack lying near the stove. But now it shifted slightly, like something inside had just twitched. Then it moved again. His stomach dropped. His mind screamed rat, but his feet were frozen in place. At that moment, he realized he couldn't just let this go. He needed to know everything. Daniel knew he shouldn't go back. He had seen enough, more than enough, but something inside him wouldn't let it rest. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was pure anger, but he needed proof. The kind of proof that would make sure no one else ever put a spoonful of that rice into their mouth again. So the next night, he returned. This time he didn't go to eat. He stayed hidden behind a neighboring stall, phone in hand, recording from a safe distance. The market was just as lively as before, the usual mix of hungry customers and sizzling food filling the air. But instead of looking at the people, Daniel focused on the kitchen. It didn't take long for the nightmare to begin. One of Mama Tinu's workers emerged from the back, carrying a large black bucket. He tilted it over the main pot of jollof rice, dumping its contents inside. Daniel's stomach twisted. Leftover rice. The same clumpy, slightly hardened grains he had seen the night before. They weren't even trying to hide it, just stirring it in, letting the heat disguise the fact that it wasn't fresh. Daniel zoomed in, making sure the camera caught every detail. Then, movement caught his eye. A rat, not small, not quick, but bold, darted across the back of the stall, its tiny claws clinking against the floor. It hesitated near a wooden table, sniffed, and then, to Daniel's absolute horror, it sank its teeth into an exposed piece of raw chicken lying on a tray. Daniel almost gagged. He kept recording as another worker walked right up to the tray, picked up the same piece of chicken, and brushed it off with his hands. No rinsing, no throwing it away, just a quick dusting like he was cleaning off a plate, and then straight into the fryer. The oil hissed and bubbled, swallowing the contaminated meat. Daniel zoomed in again, his stomach twisting as he got a clear look at the oil itself. Dark brown, nearly black, thick as syrup. It wasn't just today's frying that had turned it that color. That oil had been reused for weeks, collecting bits of old batter, dirt, maybe even dead insects. He swallowed hard. The customers had no idea. They sat on plastic chairs, chatting, eating, completely unaware of what they were putting into their bodies. If they saw what he was seeing, if they knew what he now knew, they'd never touch street food again. His hands tightened around his phone. He had the proof. Now he had to decide what to do with it. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat on his bed, phone in hand, staring at the footage over and over again. Each time he replayed it, his stomach twisted tighter. The rats, the reused rice, the filthy oil, the way that worker dusted off raw meat like it was nothing. The worst part? People were still eating there, completely unaware. His fingers hovered over the upload button. He thought about Mama Tinu. She had been running that stall for years. People trusted her. Did she even know what was happening behind the scenes? Or worse, did she know and just not care? With a deep breath, Daniel typed his caption. "If you eat street food, you need to see this. You won't believe what I caught on camera." Then he hit post. At first, it was just a few views, then a few hundred. By the time the sun started rising, it was in the thousands. The comment section exploded. "No way this is real. OMG, I eat here all the time. I'm actually sick. This is why I don't eat outside. You'll enjoy your maggot rice. Someone call NAFDAC immediately." By noon, the video had been shared over 50,000 times. The hashtags #, Mama Tinu exposed, and # street food scandal were trending. News pages picked it up. Influencers weighed in. And then, the health inspectors arrived. Daniel wasn't there when they raided the stall, but people sent him videos. Authorities in white coats walking straight into the kitchen, pulling out containers of expired meat, some repackaged with fake labels to look fresh. Inspectors dipping test strips into buckets of water only to find it was mixed with drain water, the same water used to wash the plates. Then came the biggest shock. One worker confessed on the spot. He had been handling food with an untreated skin infection for months. No gloves, no hygiene training. The customers watching the raid stood frozen in shock. Some dropped their plates, looking like they were about to be sick. Others just stared, realizing they had been eating this for years. Daniel scrolled through the comments, watching the chaos unfold. He had exposed the truth. Now, there was no going back. Mama Tinu's food stand didn't open the next day, or the day after that. The stall that once had a long line of hungry customers now stood abandoned, yellow caution tape wrapped around its wooden frame. The smell of smoky jollof had been replaced by the lingering stench of spoiled food and burnt oil. Health officials had confiscated everything. The place was done for, but the story wasn't. The video had started a bigger conversation, one that no one could ignore anymore. People weren't just talking about Mama Tinu's stall. They were talking about all the places they had been ignoring the signs. "I always thought the meat tasted weird, but I kept eating it. One time I saw a fly floating in the soup, and the guy just scooped it out like nothing." Let's be honest, if we actually checked how most of these places cook, we wouldn't eat anywhere. It wasn't just one vendor. It was a system, a habit, the belief that cheap food means you can't ask questions. Daniel hadn't planned on becoming a food safety advocate, but after seeing what his video had done, he couldn't stop there. He started posting tips, how to spot unhygienic food stalls, questions to ask before eating out, warning signs that most people overlooked. The response was overwhelming. Some people took his advice seriously. Others were still in denial, defending their favorite street food spots. Not all vendors are bad, they argued. And maybe that was true. But after what Daniel had seen, he knew one thing for sure: most people don't know what's happening behind the counter. One night, as he scrolled through the endless comments under his posts, he saw one that made his skin crawl. This is just one market. Imagine what's happening everywhere else. Daniel put his phone down. For the first time in days, he let himself breathe. He had exposed one stall, but what about the rest? How many others were out there, cutting corners, hiding things in plain sight? His stomach twisted at the thought. He looked at his screen again, hesitated for a moment, then typed out his final message. If you still buy street food after this, you might be eating more than just rice. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on the notification bell so you won't miss out on our latest stories.